Hello, my name is Tylluan. I'm a solitary pagan witch, I'm an author, I'm the founder of the Wolf and Howl Press. Today's little chat I thought would be about thinking backwards. Now, this is a very useful little exercise I thought I would suggest to you. I have a feeling it comes up, I talk about it in my book Seeking the Green. Pretty sure that's the one. Basically, one of the problems with modern life, I find, you may not, but one of the problems I find is that we've almost got tunnel vision. We're looking ahead. What's to come? What are we going to do? How are we going to get ahead? And actually, I think there's time and place for sometimes doing the opposite, looking back, seeing what came before. It's a very useful little exercise to do because it helps the brain break its patterns of thinking. If we only ever start thinking ahead, or worse, we keep looking sideways at what other people have got, this becomes a habit, and it's not necessarily a good habit. So, what we have to do, we have to start thinking to ourselves, how can we change this? And I find a very good way is to start looking backwards, which is why, for this little group of videos that we filmed, we have a very strange looking lamp here. I'm not entirely sure what it is, whether it's a railway lamp or a workman's lamp or whatever it was, but it is a lamp. And the very thick curved glass, which you can see here, was put there rather like a magnifying glass, same idea, same principle, in order to illuminate what little light there was. So that's very appropriate, isn't it, for us? It's illuminating what little light we have. It's going to shed light on it. That strange gurgling sound is Noah drinking from his bucket outside. He will certainly be in a minute, so we'll watch out. Anyway, when we look at something old like this, we are going back into a piece of social history. We're going back to a time when people couldn't just flick on lights, when they didn't have all these wonderful gadgets and gizmos. I mean, good Lord, you know, when I was a girl, you were lucky to have a telephone. The idea of having a telephone that also acted as a torch and could connect you to people thousands of miles away on the internet, well, people would have just thought you were mad. So, looking at something like this, what do we see about it? We see it's old, it's a bit rusty, but it's quite large, it's quite light for its size. The fact it has this marvellous ornate piece of glass in it shows that it was meant to magnify the light, which would not have been that big inside. You can't have huge fires burning away because it would have been an open flame. You can't have, that's a little odd, you can't have huge fires burning away because it's the heat that generates, you know. If you have a large flame, you need a larger container, and that's not always practical. So with this one, it's to illuminate what's there. But you can look at it in lots of different ways. Doesn't have to be a very old railway lamp. It can be almost anything. In fact, I found a pair of bookends one day in a charity shop, which had been made with wood from the SS Great Britain, and that set me off in an entirely different direction, but a very interesting one. What we're doing is we're looking at things like this and we're saying, what was it used for? Well, you don't have to know. We know it's a lamp of some sort, so it was considered a very useful thing. And back in the days before electricity, lamps of varying sorts, they'd have candles in them, they'd have spirit burners in them, you have miners' lamps, all sorts of different lamps, all for different purposes, all slightly different, differing degrees of safety. We don't know what it was for, we don't need to know. But what we do need to do is to think backwards. Who would have used it? What would they have thought of it? Would they have been glad of its light? Did it help them to work? Almost certainly. Doesn't look like the sort of thing you'd have in your living room. And then you start to think, well, imagine the sort of jobs. You don't have to know exactly, again, what sort of jobs would that person need to do? How long would that job have lasted for? Would they have been doing it when they were young, when they were old, when they were children? Because going back 150 years, you know, you did have child workers. What is it made of? Where did the glass come from? Who made the glass? And we know another thing about glass blowing and glass making was that it was actually quite dangerous. A lot of glass blowers died very young because of the chemicals and the fumes that went into their lungs. So we're seeing something that's made at some human cost in order to better light up a person's work, or perhaps to push along the Industrial Revolution a bit, the age of the railways, the age of factories, the age of trains. Well, I just mentioned railways, so that doesn't really count. I don't know what they're doing. But this kind of thing you can do. You start looking backwards. What about this? What is this mark? I mean, the bookmarks, the bookends I mentioned earlier, one of them had looked as though it had been scorched by fire. Now, fire on a ship, as they came from the SS Great Britain, is a terrible thing. I mean, it can literally take a ship down in no time. Certainly back in the day when ships were all made of wood. But the thing about the SS Great Britain was I think it was the first iron-hulled liner, so it wasn't entirely made of wood, but it obviously had a lot of wood in it, and this piece was singed, if you like, scorched. It could have been because of where it was positioned on the ship. It could have been because the ship was eventually partly wrecked, broken down. People might have used some of the wood for fires, even to keep themselves warm. One time it was left in the Falklands for decades. So you begin to think, finding out about things and where they come from and what they are. Finding out about books. How old are they? Can you read the Latin letters on them? It's all a way of pushing ourselves backwards. I mean, nowadays you'd hardly ever see a book with the Roman numerals on it. But of course, well, up until perhaps 1940, you would. And back in the 19th century, and before that, you would certainly see always Roman numerals. And that's another way of counting and looking and learning and thinking. Why does it help a spiritual path? It helps a spiritual path because we have stopped looking, tunnel vision, looking forward. What can I do? What can I be? What can I get? What can I buy? Instead of that, you're looking back and you're thinking about an object. It doesn't matter if it's your object or not. That's not the point. The point is you're looking backwards. You can do it with the landscape. What used to be here? Why was this road called Shambles Lane? Oh, and that's little Homer shrieking. The reason something is called the Shambles is because there was a slaughterhouse there. Little things like that. You're starting to look backwards. You're starting to find out what is here before you. And I do believe that's a very vital part of any spiritual path, that we do try and find what comes before us, and we're not always looking forwards. Anyway, as always with my suggestions, these are suggestions. I'm not saying it's the right way. I'm certainly not saying it's the only way. But give it a try. See if you can make it your way. And thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.